Hi, Haunted family. Welcome back to another episode. I really hope you've been enjoying the stories I've been sharing with you so far. One of the stories last week involved an episode that was most likely sleep paralysis. While I don't believe that sleep paralysis always has a paranormal root, I do believe that sometimes being in a haunted house can trigger episodes of sleep paralysis. I personally have dealt with sleep paralysis off and on through a good portion of my life. And while I have learned different techniques to stave off episodes, sometimes out of the blue, just randomly, I wake up without the ability to move. It's gotten less scary, but I do understand these people who say that sleep paralysis is terrifying and firmly believe that there are supernatural forces at work in their sleep paralysis. Maybe there is for some. I don't know. So in this episode, I'm going to share several stories that deal with sleep paralysis. I hope you enjoy. Thanks for listening. I was a junior in college and living by myself in a tiny 2-room apartment located above a storefront on Philadelphia Street in Indiana, Pennsylvania. I was feeling particularly exhausted after classes and decided to take a quick nap on my couch. It was late afternoon, and the apartment had a dusky quality to it because of the light outside. The kitchen and the living room was one and the same. The kitchen on one wall and the living room on the other. The door to the apartment was directly across the room from the couch. I remember waking up, on my back, unable to move, like I was frozen. I looked over to the door and heard footsteps coming up the stairs from the street. That was not unusual because a lot of students lived in the building, except that these were exceptionally loud footsteps, and I sensed dread. I did not see the door open, I just realized that it was. I felt something enter the room. I was extremely scared, because I could see my apartment, but I could not move. I did not try to speak, because I knew I was alone. I felt myself pinching my leg to see if I was dreaming. It was only a dull pressure, no pain. So I assumed I was dreaming, but it was so real. I did not see it come in, though. I had a dry erase board tacked to the wall, above my phone stand, right next to my bedroom door. The board was full of messages that I hadn't erased yet. I stared at the board, and the letters began to rearrange themselves, kind of like scrambling up together to form a new message, but in a blur. I did not want to read the message. I continued to struggle to wake myself up, and to rationalize what was happening when I felt the presence beside me. It was sitting in a stuffed chair that was right next to the couch, by my head. I forced myself to turn my head to look at this thing. It was oddly covered in a flowered sheet, which I did not own. I saw my right arm slowly reach towards the sheet, because I had this overwhelming desire to pull the sheet off of whatever was sitting there. It felt like pushing through something almost like solidified concrete. At this point, I was really angry at being froze. I wanted to tear this thing off. I felt that my head was turning towards it, and I saw my arm reaching for it. But at the same time, I saw the same arm still pinned to my side, like I had 2 right arms. I can't even begin to explain that one. Someone told me that I was possibly beginning to leave my body like an out-of-body experience. Anyway, I was suddenly aware that I had been fiercely praying to God, saying the Lord's Prayer over and over again. My arm was still reaching for the sheet when all of a sudden I woke up. My heart was pounding and my mouth was bone dry. Everything in my apartment was exactly as it should be, including my door, closed and locked. I never did read the message on my message board. When I took a shower later that night, I noticed red welts that had begun to bruise from pinching myself awake on my thighs. Nothing else has ever happened there. I went to a psychic a few months after it had happened, and he told me that I had a gift of communication. I chuckled and told him that I did not want this gift at the moment, and he said that I could use it whenever I was ready to. He rationalized that the reason I never saw the message on the board clearly was because I chose not to communicate with it. He also told me that if I wanted to see it, just say, "In the name of Jesus, what do you want with me?" I don't think I'll ever be ready for that step. I'm familiar with stories and myths of the old hag and of sleep paralysis. and of demons and Ouija and spirits. In fact, you might consider me an expert with them, at least with personal experiences with them. I think I could probably write a book about my experiences. But this particular story took place over the span of 6 months in a house I rented in Andover, Massachusetts. As you probably know, Massachusetts has a rich, ghostly history, with wars fought on its soil, and Indians innocently slaughtered, and young girls burned at the stake for supposed witchcraft. I'm lucky to live here. This story has a beginning, and it all started around June 8th, 2003, at 4 a.m. The odd thing about this is that at the same date and the same time, my boyfriend was in a very serious accident, thrown 60 feet from a vehicle, and went into a coma. I do not know what the link between this and the haunting is, but at 4 a.m. that very morning of the accident, I was sitting on the couch in the family room with a friend, and we heard dishes moving around in the sink, the water running, normal kitchen sounds. I asked my friend, who I was sitting with, if he heard too, and he said yes, and we went into the kitchen to see who had arrived. Our door was never locked, so it was entirely possible that someone had arrived late that night. No one was there, and the kitchen was still enveloped in darkness, as it should be at 4 a.m. From that day on, we constantly heard sounds in the kitchen, of dishes being washed and stacked and put away, and footsteps with no one attached to them. And all the while, no one was ever there, anyone living anyway. In fact, there was at least 20 times, no exaggeration whatsoever, we had friends over, and they would hear it and say, "Who else is here?" And I would casually answer, "Oh, nobody." And they would get up off the couch and go into the kitchen to say hi, and walk slowly back into the family room and say, "You're right," usually a few shades paler than a few moments ago. I would come home from work at 6:15 every night and open the door and say hello, because I could hear people in my kitchen. There was never anyone there to greet me back. I stopped saying hello a few weeks after that, but the noise and disturbances didn't stop there. There was at least 5 times that the TV and radio came on out of nowhere, and they belonged to different roommates, so it could not have been the machines themselves. They always came on very loud, causing everyone to jump and shut it off. My roommate always chose to ignore these disturbances and would poke fun at me and say, "Well, the ghosts aren't hurting anyone, are they?" My roommate's boyfriend told me, in confidence of course, God forbid people actually believe in this stuff, that he saw a completely black shadow person walking around in his girlfriend's room one night, while they were both in bed. One time, when there was no open windows to create a draft, a door slammed shut behind him, and that really rattled him because he tried desperately to find a reason for the occurrence, searching for a draft for peace of mind, but never finding any. People who would sleep downstairs, where the kitchen was, would hear things all night long. 2 pairs of blinds fell down from the windows in the same night. Footsteps with no one ever entering the rooms. Weird swooshing sounds would be heard as well. In fact, I know all of these sounds fake. It sounds like I'm crazy, but I swear to you, those months I could not even go to the bathroom by myself. Someone had to go with me and stand outside. In the loft on the 3rd floor, where my bedroom was, one of my friends was held down in broad daylight and whispered to by a person who was not there. Her eyes remained open the whole time. She sensed it was a man. The time was about 9 a.m., and the sun was streaming into the window, and she had just woken up to find that she couldn't move. There were a few nights that we heard what I call booming footsteps, which would come in the door from the kitchen and walk through the downstairs, up the stairs to the 2nd floor, and stop. I would be in the loft praying with all my might that it would not come up to the loft. Lucky for it, it never did, because I do not know what I would have done. My boyfriend, who heard all of this, because he lived there too, after he of course recovered from his accident, would have no explanation. I would say, "Can you hear that?" And he would say, "Yes." And then I would say, "Well, then what the hell is it?" He would just shrug and say, "I don't know." No one could ever tell me what was going on. I brought in a local group of paranormal investigators, and they were wonderful, friendly, down-to-earth, normal people who came out and offered to help. They were nothing like the movie Ghostbusters, even though my sister kept humming the theme song while they were here. They researched the area and found that the house was about 100 years old, and used to be housing for a mill, which was located directly behind our house. which had since been converted into elderly housing. There was also a tragic flood in the 1950s, which people probably died in also. And, of course, Native Americans had inhabited this land at some point. I've dealt with sleep paralysis for years, at least 11 years that I can remember, and thank God it never actually happened while I lived in that house. Probably because I used to sleep 4 nights a week at my parents' house, or pull all-nighters out of intense fear of it happening while I lived in that house. And the worst part of the house was the terrible atmosphere. I'm not usually a mean person, but I had my ugliest moments in that house, and so did the people I lived with. After I left, I felt like a tremendous weight had been lifted. I have not experienced terror like I did in that house since, and I hope I never do. I would not wish that house upon my worst enemy. My whole family has clairvoyant abilities to some degree or another, and none of us have been stupid enough to play with a Ouija board. We've never had any problems with ghosts in the past, despite a couple deaths in the family. Our house isn't too special. It's not built on holy ground or cemeteries or Indian burial grounds or anything of that nature. As far as we know, no one has died here, and there's nothing to suggest that it could be haunted. And it's not. However, things come and go. Spiritual energy of some kind is just attracted to my family, mostly my youngest sister. She wakes up in the night and sees shadows moving through the house. And no, nothing causes those shadows. I've seen them a couple times, and my other sister has as well. One night, one of my sisters was walking down the hall when she looked in a mirror and saw the shape of a woman in a hood. A second later, the other sibling saw the same shape running through her room. I often hear footsteps running up and down the stairs, outside my window, too fast to be a human or animal. One day I was home alone, walking down the hall, and I glanced up at the mirror and saw someone walking behind me. He wore glasses and black clothes, and there was nothing special about him. His hair was blonde and spiky, nothing too gory or gross. I spun around and there was no one there. Then there are the nightmares. My dad's woken up, sensing something was in the room with him. He's seen shadows standing beside the bed. I've done that too. I don't believe it's sleep paralysis. We can move our bodies some. You can't do that with sleep paralysis. I have the worst nightmares, and I often dream of being attacked, and I wake up with scratches all over my body. We have no pets aside from a goldfish, and I don't think they can scratch. No one could have done it to me. There's no sleepwalkers in my family. And I couldn't have done it myself, as I have short nails. The biggest experience we've had is just outside the basement. My sisters are all deathly afraid of going down there, and I am too, but it doesn't stop me. One day, one of them, the elder of the two, was just outside of it with me. We were sitting there, chatting away, when suddenly it felt cold, very cold. We began to follow it around the room, when it physically grabbed my arm and began to push me in the direction of the basement. We ignored it and sat back down. A second later, I felt something begin to spin my chair around, with me still on it. We've checked the basement and there's nothing there. It's all just little things, and I don't believe there's just one spirit doing it. I do, however, wish they would stop interfering with sleep, because that is the most annoying of them all.